Generation means the period that it takes for children to be born, grow up, and have children of their own. A generation is usually considered to be about 25 years. However, these days, generation is often referred to all the people of a similar age when they are considered to have the same social characteristics.
Today, let's look at Generation MZ, which has recently become popular. Division of generations in Korea before Generation MZ.
Throughout history, people are shown to have many babies right after wars. The generation born between 1954 and 1963 has been called the baby boom generation. The 386 generations are referred to as people in their 30s who were college students in the 1980s and were born in the 1960s. That means they were university students in the 1980s and led democratization. They are now called the 586 generations.
While the economy was flourishing in the 1980s and 1890s, Generation X, born in the 1970s, spent their childhood.
However, they faced the 1997 economic crisis right after graduation from university.
The definition of Generation MZ. The following generation, Generation MZ, is a combination of Generation M and Generation Z.
The year 2000 was called the millennium.
Since they became adults in the 2000s, they were called Generation M. Generation Y came right after Generation X. Generation M was born between 1980 and 1994 and established the current internet culture. Generation Z, born between 1995 and 2011, was called that because they were followed by Generation X and Generation Y. With advances in the internet and the spread of smartphones, they started to use social media services, SNS. Based on the internet, they could share the same culture of Generation M. Generation MZ is referred to as the generation with a combination of Generation M and Generation Z. Characteristics of Generation MZ. Here are the characteristics of Generation MZ.
First, they set a high value on individual happiness. The previous generations valued the happiness of the country and people rather than individual happiness.
However, Generation MZ set a high value on individual happiness, as you can see their trend from Sowa Kane,
a term used to describe small but certain happiness. Second, they believe marriage is a matter of personal choice. People in the past valued getting married and having a family.
However, the number of Generation MZ who decides not to get married and stay single has significantly increased. Third, they conflict with their previous generations, Generation X and 586 generations, who are people in their 40s and 50s.
They show animosity towards stubborn old men at work.
Fourth, they actively use SNS. They hope to share their daily lives with others through SNS.